Brexit, the thinking game. So at the end of the documentary I made, I had a few comments regarding my conclusion, why the status quo is changing, and why everybody is involved. Why is Brexit arrogant? Why is remaining naive? And why could it lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom? Well, to answer this question properly, I have to explain the psychology of Brexit over time. Before the referendum was a large belief that no matter who the British people voted into power, they would end up worse off. This belief came from a combination of events. Firstly, we had continuous alternating governments between Labour and the Conservatives since the Second World War, but more recent history, such as the Iraq War and the banking crisis, kept the public from any longer trusting the centre-left. Now you might therefore expect the Tories on the centre-right of the UK politics would therefore be popular, but quite the opposite happened. David Cameron's government tried to carry on the failed international policies of the previous Labour government in invading Syria and Libya, as you'd expect from the right. But the UK also saw rises in immigration and immigration targets not being met. Then Cameron's government tried to be the party of social justice, introducing rights for gay marriage, but at the same time they were introducing austerity to deal with the deficit left over from the previous Labour government. Not to mention, the first term David Cameron served was a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. They ended up raising tuition fees, which ended up betraying their election promises and cost the Lib Dems seats at the next election. David Cameron also adopted the more left of politics approach to democratic referendums, introducing the Scottish referendum and, of course, Brexit. So you had this weird government where on the one hand they were happy to commit to austerity and invade foreign countries, but on the other hand they wanted to introduce gay marriage, give us more referendums and keep immigration high. But after the 2015 election, when the SNP took control of most of Scotland and David Cameron only had a small majority, it became clear that there was a lot of people in the UK who just felt like they had no voice. Basically, everyone started turning to the extremes of politics for an answer. UKIP of the right became popular, Corbyn of the left was becoming popular, and the SNP of the nationalists were becoming popular.
We need an approach that recognises that Brussels has got too big, too bossy, too interfering. It should be nation states wherever possible, Europe only where necessary. And of course we need people running these organisations who really understand that.
The centre of politics and globalism became majorly unpopular, mainly because of the problems it had caused for everyday working people. Problems like terrorism, unemployment, a changing high street, etc., that became very noticeable. Now, it's long been thought that David Cameron held the Brexit referendum with the assumption he could win it in favour of Remain to get rid of UKIP from the political landscape. In that sense, Brexit was quite an arrogant thing to do. But you could also argue that by believing that by simply leaving the European Union would automatically fix UK politics and the problems I just mentioned is in itself an arrogant assumption. But at the time, it was considered naive to assume that all the fear-mongering about leaving was also correct. This was down to events such as the Iraq War, which proved how much a politician could manipulate an argument and lie to the public. But also, the mainstream media in the UK had been beset with a series of scandals that questioned their legitimacy. But the vote to leave was mostly the core belief that changing the status quo was better than keeping everything the same. It didn't matter how much David Cameron tried to reform the EU from inside it, the UK believed that part of the problem was not having control of our laws, our borders, and our money. But the vote itself raised the issue of what the UK does with those who disagree with that statement. Some of those people, or Remainers as they became to be known, were entire countries within the UK, such as Northern Ireland and Scotland, which is why Brexit could lead to the breakup of the UK. It also happened to involve most of Parliament. Nobody knew how to implement Brexit, just knew a majority of those who voted wanted to leave. It's when the UK started to focus on the technicalities of actually leaving that it became clear this wasn't as easy as first assumed, nor would it necessarily solve Britain's problems should economic fears come true. May's government has been equally as mixed between right-wing and left-wing politics. For example, on the one hand, she wants to ensure the rights of EU citizens and allow immigration for youth. But on the other, she promises to end free movement. She wanted to take Brexit away from parliamentary sovereignty, and she will take us out of the single market, despite the economic consequences. This leads to confusion and distrust. The economic reality of Brexit was not explored or believed prior to the referendum, hence why people, to this day, still attribute our economic uncertainty to political incompetence, in the same way people blamed Gordon Brown for the economic recession. If anything, the political landscape has drifted even further to the extremes of politics, away from the mainstream people than it did prior to the referendum. On the left, you have momentum and the people's vote marches, the people demanding to stop Brexit now. Of course, there's a naivety to assume that stopping Brexit will solve everything that's happened since the referendum, and also that the EU would let us remain. On the right are Tommy Robinson supporters, who distrust the establishment so much they associate a man's arrest to an establishment cover-up in favour of Muslim rape gangs. Mainstream politics is having to adopt these principles to stay afloat. Labour promised a second referendum. UKIP have Tommy Robinson as advisor, for example. Meanwhile, we have the even more mainstream sides of the parties tearing themselves apart over what to do with Brexit. Some asking for a no deal, some asking for May to quit or a general election. There are so many options. As May's deal is expected to be rejected, the alternatives that we could choose could go on to embolden the opposite side of politics to what it's on. For example, if we called for a second referendum, the right would be angry. If we called for a no deal, the left would be angry. It's not clear yet what that divide would do to the country, but it's a divide that's going to affect the entire world for years to come. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.